In the brutal, sun-scorched world of colonial Brazil, to even raise a hand to a master was to sign your own death warrant, often in the most public and agonizing way imaginable. But for one young woman, the searing pain of a whip was a fleeting agony compared to the unquenchable fire of defiance in her spirit. After a single, bloody act of rebellion, she would be forced to flee into the suffocating depths of a jungle few dared to enter. She would be hunted by men who lived for the chase, ruthless men who would not stop until she was caught and made an example of. What they could not possibly know was that the very jungle they saw as a green, living hell, she called home. This is the story of how she used the ancient secrets of the forest not merely to survive, but to follow a whisper on the wind, the legend of a hidden kingdom built on the very idea of freedom. Our story begins in the 19th century heart of the Portuguese Empire's most profitable and monstrous machine, the Brazilian sugar trade. The coastal city of Salvador, in the province of Bahia, was a city of two faces, a gateway to two entirely different worlds. For the white colonists, whose ships crowded the harbor, it was a portal to unimaginable wealth built on endless fields of sugarcane. But for the hundreds of thousands of Africans ripped from their homes and forced across the Atlantic in the suffocating holds of slave ships, it was the gateway to a living hell. In the city's upper district, the Pelerinho, named for the whipping post at its center, human beings were bought and sold like livestock. The air was thick with the smells of sweat, fear, and desperation. And it was here, on a crude wooden platform, that a young woman, stripped of her name and given one of convenience, Maria Dilva, stood on the auction block. She endured the humiliation of being inspected like an animal, her teeth checked, her muscles prodded, her spirit assessed, just another piece of merchandise for the voracious colonial economy. Her buyer was Colonel Antonio Ferreira Costa, a man whose casual cruelty was as vast and sprawling as his sugar plantation, the Ingenho Santo Antonio. To the colonel, Maria was not a person. She was another piece, a cog in the brutal, grinding machinery of sugar production. The journey from the city to the plantation was a descent into a deeper circle of misery, leaving the last vestiges of civilization behind for a kingdom of pure tyranny. The life of a field slave on a sugar plantation was notoriously short and savage. The day began before the sun rose and ended long after it set. The work was beyond backbreaking, it was soul-crushing. Imagine cutting the thick, fibrous stalks of sugarcane under a relentless tropical sun, the air a humid, sticky blanket filled with the buzz of insects, and the constant, chilling threat of the overseer's whip. The sugarcane leaves themselves were sharp, leaving 1,000 tiny cuts on hands and arms, which stung with sweat and festered in the heat. The nights offered no true respite, only a different kind of suffering. The enslaved were crammed into windowless, airless slave quarters known as *senzalas*, where the stench of unwashed bodies, sickness, and despair was a physical presence. In these wretched barracks, disease spread like wildfire, and privacy was a forgotten luxury. But Maria was more than just a victim enduring her fate. She was a vessel of memory, a descendant of a people who knew the taste of freedom, and she carried their knowledge within her like a secret fire. Her grandmother, before being stolen from her homeland, had been a healer, a woman who understood the deep connection between the people and the land. In hushed tones, in stolen moments, she had passed down stories to Maria not of kings and queens, but of the earth itself, the great protector. She taught Maria the language of the forest, which leaves could mask a human scent, which roots could be chewed to soothe a wound or quell a fever, and which seemingly innocent berries held a swift and deadly poison. This was not folklore, it was a textbook for survival. So, as Maria toiled in the cane fields, she did more than work. She watched. She learned the guards' patrol routes, the blind spots in their vigilance, the rhythms of the plantation, and she listened to the terrified whispers among the masters about the Quilombos, hidden communities of escaped slaves nestled deep in the forest. She tucked this knowledge away, a seed of rebellion planted in the fertile soil of her mind, just waiting for the right bloody moment to sprout. On a plantation where cruelty was the currency of control, survival often meant mastering the art of invisibility. It meant learning to swallow the bile of rage that rose in your throat, to end your daily humiliations with a blank face, and to pray that each day was not your last. Maria became a phantom, her movements quiet, her work efficient, her presence utterly unnoticeable. This very diligence, meant to keep her safe, ironically brought her greater danger. She was moved from the scorching fields into the oppressive quiet of the Casa Grande, the master's house. Some might have seen this as an act of mercy, an escape from the sun and the lash. But Maria knew it was merely a trade, exchanging the overt brutality of the field for a different kind of peril, one that was more personal, more predatory, and far more suffocating. Colonel Costa was a man who believed his power was absolute, his every desire a law to be obeyed. One sweltering evening, drunk on cheap wine and his own unassailable sense of impunity, he found Maria polishing silverware in a deserted corridor. In his eyes, she was not a person deserving of respect, but an object for his gratification, a perk of his ownership. He cornered her, his breath sour, his intentions sickeningly clear in his leering gaze. In that single, terrifying moment, years of suppressed fury, of swallowed insults and endured pain, ignited into a raging inferno. The carefully constructed mask of deference, the knowing fear, the forced invisibility, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated rage. As the colonel lunged for her, his hand reaching to grab her, her own hand shot out, not in defense, but in attack. It closed around the cold, unforgiving steel of a letter opener lying on his nearby writing desk. This was not a planned uprising. It was not a calculated act of rebellion. It was a primal scream of defiance, finally given a sharp, steel point. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She reacted. The strike was swift, desperate, and brutally fatal. The colonel, the master of all he surveyed, collapsed in a heap, a look of stunned disbelief permanently etched on his face. The very symbol of his power and literacy, the tool with which he signed orders and tallied profits, was now the instrument of his death. For a single, deafening heartbeat, there was only silence, broken by the gurgling sound from his throat. Then, the sound of approaching footsteps from the main hall. A wave of panic crashed over her, but it was immediately followed by a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. There would be no trial, no mercy, no understanding. Her act, whether in self-defense or pure defiance, had earned her an automatic death sentence, one that would be made into a slow, tortuous spectacle designed to terrorize every other slave on the plantation. And so she ran, not toward the familiar roads or the distant port, but toward the one place the masters feared more than God, the one place they saw as a living tomb, the dense, suffocating, uncharted Atlantic forest. As the alarm bells of the Ingenho Santo Antonio began to clang violently, shattering the night's tranquility, Maria Delva vanished into the green abyss, leaving behind a dead man, her slave name, and the life that had been forced upon her forever. With the first light of dawn came the hunt. Colonel Costa was a powerful man, and his death was an insult that demanded a bloody and public vengeance. A massive bounty was placed on her head, a sum that attracted the most feared and ruthless trackers in all of Brazil, the Capitães do Mato, the self-styled captains of the forest. These were relentless men, often of mixed ancestry themselves, who made their living hunting escaped slaves. They were infamous for their brutality and their uncanny ability to navigate the fringes of the jungle, boasting that they could track a single footprint across solid rock. With their pack of trained dogs and their casual cruelty, they set out, figuring their quarry alone, terrified how slave would be caught, chained, and dragged back for execution within a matter of days. But the woman they were hunting was not Maria Delva anymore. That name, that identity, had died in the colonel's study, in the deep green sanctuary of the forest. She became someone new, someone her ancestors would have recognized. She took back a name she remembered from her grandmother's whispered stories, a name that felt like a shield and a promise. Adora. It meant daughter of the people. And Adora was not going to be easy prey. The hunters saw the jungle as an enemy, a hostile obstacle to be hacked through and conquered. For Adora, it was an ally, a sprawling, living fortress. The knowledge passed down from her grandmother was now the key to her very existence. She moved through the thick, tangled undergrowth not with force, but with a deep, intuitive understanding of its rhythms. She used the dense, multi-layered canopy to shield herself from the sun and prying eyes above, and waited for miles through cold, rushing streams to mask her scent from the hounds. She knew which bright red mushrooms were a gift of sustenance, and which dull-colored fungi could create a potent irritant to throw the tracking dogs into a frenzy of sneezing and confusion. Days bled into a week, and then another. The hunters' arrogance curdled into raw frustration. Their supplies dwindled. The jungle, which was supposed to be a simple obstacle, had become a disorienting, hostile maze that seemed to actively work against them. For them, Adora was a ghost, a whisper in the trees, a phantom that was always one step ahead. She began setting simple but brilliant traps not designed to kill, but to wound and demoralize. A disguised pit lined with sharpened bamboo stakes that injured a lead tracker's leg. A tripwire that sent a massive hornet's nest crashing down onto the hunting party, scattering them in a panic of agonizing stings. These weren't the tactics of a soldier. They were the tactics of resistance, born of the land and passed down through generations of survivors. Hiding in the high branches of a ceiba tree, she began to overhear the hunters' conversations. They spoke with a mixture of frustration and superstitious fear about a place deep in the forest they called Palmaris Novo, a cursed region, rumored to be the impenetrable home of a new Quilombo. They spoke its name in hushed, fearful tones. It was named in honor of the legendary Quilombo dos Palmares, a massive kingdom of runaways that had resisted the Portuguese Empire for nearly 100 years. The hunters saw it as a den of demons and savages. For Adora, hearing that name was like a lightning strike. It was a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. Her desperate escape was no longer just a flight from something. It had become a pilgrimage to something. She finally had a destination, a kingdom of her own people. The lead hunter, a man named Vicente, was not the type to give up. The bounty on Adora's head was immense, but now his professional pride was on the line. This phantom of the forest had made a fool of him. He pushed his few remaining men deeper into a territory their instincts screamed at them to avoid. He ignored their pleas to turn back. He was close. He could feel it. He found a freshly disturbed patch of earth, a sign she was nearby and perhaps finally getting tired. But Adora wasn't tired. She was waiting. She had meticulously chosen her ground, a narrow, vine-choked ravine with slick, moss-covered walls, a natural trap. She had left the signs for Vicente to find, baiting him, drawing him in. She let him, and his last two men follow her trail right into the heart of it. As they hacked their way through the thick, hanging vegetation, their frustration making them clumsy, she made her move. From a concealed ledge above, she used a thick branch as a lever and sent a huge, precariously balanced boulder crashing down not onto them, but onto the narrow path behind them, sealing the only exit with a deafening boom and a cloud of dust. They were trapped. Before they could even process the thunderous noise or their new reality, she emerged from the shadows at the far end of the ravine. She wasn't the frightened girl from the Casa-Grande. She wasn't holding a letter opener now. She held a simple but effective bow with arrows she had carefully tipped in a paralyzing agent derived from the skin of local poison frogs. She was no longer a cornered animal. She was a predator in her own domain. An arrow flew silent and swift, striking one of the hunters in the thigh. He cried out once, then collapsed, his limbs twitching and then going rigid. The other man, consumed by panic, dropped his rifle, and tried to scramble up the slick rock wall, only for Adora to appear above him, as if from nowhere, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain to disarm and disable him in seconds. Now only Vicente stood alone facing the woman he had relentlessly hunted for weeks. He stared, not at a terrified slave, but at a warrior. He was gaunt-scarred and clothed in rags, but her eyes burned with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. He fumbled to raise his rifle, but it was far too late. She was too close, too fast. With a powerful strike, she didn't kill him. She simply broke his rifle over a rock and left him, defeated and trapped in the ravine with his men. Her message was brutally clear. This is my forest now. Follow me further, and you are just digging your own grave. Wounded, utterly exhausted, but spiritually soaring, Adora pushed on. She followed the subtle signs her grandmother had taught her to recognize: a tree carved with a symbol that looked like a natural marking, a specific pattern of stones in a creek bed that could only be man-made. Finally, as dusk settled and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, she heard it, the low, melodious call of a bird she'd never heard before. Remembering the old stories of how Quilombos communicated, she took a deep breath and mimicked the call. A tense silence followed. Then, the call was returned. Out of the dense wall of jungle, two armed and wary figures emerged, their weapons at the ready. They looked at her tattered clothes, her bleeding wounds, and the fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes. They didn't see a runaway slave. They saw a survivor, a warrior. They slowly lowered their weapons and, with a silent nod, led her through a hidden entrance, a curtain of vines that concealed the path to the Quilombo of Palmares Novo. She was home. But Adora's story doesn't end with her arrival. In fact, this is where it truly begins. In Palmares Novo, she found not a crude camp, but a thriving, organized community built on shared principles of freedom and fierce self-determination. They had built a new society, a direct and defiant alternative to the brutal plantation system, where African and indigenous traditions blended to create a new, resilient culture of freedom. Here, a person's worth was not measured by their capacity for labor, but by their commitment to the community. While Adora herself is a fictional character, her journey represents a powerful and vital truth of Brazilian history. For over 300 years, the most common and effective form of slave resistance in Brazil was not revolt, but escape, and the formation of quilombos. These hidden communities, sometimes just a few dozen people, other times sprawling, fortified republics like the Great Quilombo dos Palmares, which may have had a population in the thousands, were potent symbols of defiance. They were beacons of freedom that constantly threatened the very foundation of slavery simply by proving that another way of life was possible. The people of the Quilombos, known as Quilombolas, defended their liberty with a deep, encyclopedic knowledge of the land and sophisticated guerrilla tactics, successfully fighting off colonial forces for decades, and in some cases, for generations. And that legacy is not just history, it is vibrantly alive today. There are thousands of officially recognized Quilombo communities in Brazil, whose people are the direct descendants of these original freedom fighters. They continue to struggle for the legal rights to their ancestral lands, preserving a culture that was literally forged in the fires of resistance. They are a living testament to an undeniable fact, that even in the face of the most oppressive and dehumanizing systems imaginable, the human spirit will always find a way to fight for its own freedom. History is filled with countless heroes like Adora whose stories have been overlooked, buried, or intentionally erased. If you want to support our mission to bring these incredible, vital narratives of rebellion and survival into the light, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. For those who are able, please consider supporting us on Patreon so we can continue to create documentaries about the forgotten figures who refuse to be broken and, in doing so, change the course of history. Thanks for watching.